The lights of Hollywood Boulevard glittered like a sea of restless stars as limousines lined up outside the studio. Inside, the familiar buzz of Jimmy Kimmel Live filled the air, camera operators adjusting angles, producers whispering into headsets, audience members chattering excitedly. Tonight's guest was a legend. Not just an actor, not just an action star, but a symbol of grit, survival, and raw American determination. Sylvester Stallone. At 70 plus, Stallone still carried himself like a man who had wrestled life to the ground and refused to let go. His walk was slower now, but deliberate. His eyes, sharp, observant, missed nothing. He'd been through too much in his life to be intimidated by bright lights or clever jokes. Backstage, Stallone adjusted the cuffs of his jacket while a young production assistant nervously went over last-minute details. 5 minutes, Mr. Stallone, she said, trying not to sound starstruck. He smiled politely. Take your time. I've waited my whole life for worse things than 5 minutes. The assistant laughed, relieved. Stallone had agreed to the interview to promote his new project, a deeply personal film inspired by his early struggles, sleeping in bus stations, selling his dog for food money, being rejected hundreds of times before Rocky changed everything. It wasn't just another movie to him. It was a confession, a reminder that legends aren't born, they're broken, rebuilt, and scarred. Jimmy Kimmel, meanwhile, was in his dressing room, flipping through his cue cards. He smirked as he skimmed over a few lines. Okay, he muttered, this'll get a reaction. A producer hesitated nearby. Jimmy, maybe we don't push too hard tonight. Stallone doesn't do well with disrespect. Kimmel waved him off. Relax. He's a tough guy. He can take a joke. The producer didn't look convinced. The audience erupted as the band finished the intro. Jimmy walked out, soaking in the applause, flashing his trademark grin. Thank you, he said, settling behind his desk. We've got an incredible show tonight. My next guest is one of the biggest action stars in movie history. Please welcome Sylvester Stallone. The applause doubled in volume as Stallone stepped out. He waved, nodded, and shared a firm handshake with Jimmy before taking his seat. For a moment, everything felt smooth. Comfortable. Two veterans of entertainment sharing the same stage. Jimmy started light. Sylvester, you've been punching people on screen longer than most of our audience has been alive. Stallone chuckled. Yeah, and somehow, I'm still standing. Barely. The audience laughed. They talked about the new movie, about training, about how Stallone still woke up sore every morning. So, Jimmy said, glancing at his cards, this movie's about struggle. About rejection. About being told, no, over and over again. Stallone nodded. That's life. Especially when you start with nothing. Jimmy leaned forward. But you did have something. I mean, your face alone, no one else sounded like that or looked like that. Some people say your success was more about being unique than talented. A ripple of uneasy laughter passed through the audience. Stallone's smile faded slightly. Unique isn't always a compliment, he said calmly. For years, it was the reason casting directors laughed me out of rooms. Jimmy raised an eyebrow. Sure, but come on, today you're worth hundreds of millions. Hard to feel too bad, right? Stallone exhaled slowly. Money doesn't erase humiliation. Or hunger. The producer backstage shifted uncomfortably. Jimmy chuckled, sensing tension but pressing on. Speaking of humiliation, is it true you once sold your dog because you were so broke? I mean, that's pretty extreme. The audience laughed again, louder this time. Stallone's jaw tightened. I didn't sell a dog, like it was a used couch, he said. I gave up my best friend because I couldn't feed him. That kind of choice stays with you. Jimmy shrugged. Well, at least you got him back. Happy ending. Hollywood loves those. The laughter this time was thinner. Stallone stared at Jimmy for a long second. His eyes were calm, but something behind them hardened. That dog saved my life, he said quietly. When I had nothing else. The room went still. Jimmy cleared his throat, forcing a smile. All right, let's not get too heavy. People expect fun. Stallone nodded slowly. Respect is fun too. The audience applauded, sensing the shift. Jimmy flipped another card, ignoring the warning signs. You've played tough guys your whole career, he said. Rambo, Rocky, always the hero who never cries. But in real life, you've had some, let's say questionable moments. Failed marriages, box office flops. Ever feel like the tough guy image was just compensation? A sharp inhale rippled through the audience. Backstage, a producer whispered, "Oh no." Stallone's voice remained steady, but his hands clenched together. "Everyone fails," he said. "The difference is whether you learn or become bitter." Jimmy smirked. "So which one were you?" That was the moment. Stallone leaned back slightly, studying Jimmy as if seeing him clearly for the first time. "You know," Stallone said, "I've been interviewed by kings, presidents, and people who hated me openly. None of them confused cruelty with comedy." The audience gasped, then applauded. Jimmy laughed nervously. "Hey, it's just a conversation." "No," Stallone replied. "It's a line. And you're dancing on it." The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut with a knife. Jimmy tried to recover. "All right, let's move on." But Stallone raised a hand. "I came here to talk about art. About perseverance. About giving people hope. Not to be turned into a punchline." The applause grew louder. Jimmy's smile vanished. "You're being a little sensitive, don't you think?" Stallone stood up. The audience fell into stunned silence. "Sensitivity," Stallone said slowly, "is what kept me alive when the world told me I didn't belong." Jimmy looked up at him, stunned. "And tonight," Stallone continued, his voice firm, "you went too far." Gasps echoed through the studio. Producers rushed toward the stage, unsure what to do. Stallone turned toward the audience and gave a small nod. "Thank you for listening," he said. Then he looked back at Jimmy one last time. "I've walked out of worse fights than this." And with that, he stepped off the stage, disappearing behind the curtain as the audience erupted into chaotic applause, whispers, and disbelief. Jimmy sat frozen at his desk, staring at the empty chair. For the first time all night, he had no joke ready. And America had just watched a Hollywood legend draw a line. Live on air. The moment Sylvester Stallone disappeared behind the curtain, the studio fell into chaos. Applause clashed with shocked murmurs. Some audience members stood, unsure whether they had just witnessed an iconic stand for dignity, or a television disaster unfolding in real time. The band hesitated, fingers hovering over instruments, waiting for a cue that never came. Jimmy Kimmel sat motionless, one hand resting on his desk, the other gripping a cue card he no longer needed. The empty chair beside him felt louder than any joke he could have told. "Well," Jimmy finally muttered, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "That's television, folks." The words echoed hollowly. The director's voice crackled through the control room. Cut to commercial. Now. Red lights blinked off. The show went dark. Backstage, Stallone walked with steady steps, ignoring the frantic producer jogging behind him. "Mr. Stallone, Sylvester, please, just a minute," the producer pleaded. "We can fix this." Stallone stopped. He turned slowly, his face calm but resolute. "Some things aren't fixed by editing." But Jimmy didn't mean. Stallone raised a hand. "Intent doesn't erase impact." The producer swallowed hard. "The internet is going to explode." Stallone gave a faint smile. "It already has." And he walked out of the studio, past stunned staffers, straight into the cool Los Angeles night. Within minutes, clips flooded social media. Stallone walks out live on air. "You went too far." Stallone shuts down Kimmel. Hollywood legend draws the line. Twitter, now X, erupted. Fans replayed the exchange frame by frame, slowing down Stallone's expressions, analyzing Jimmy's tone, debating where humor ended and disrespect began. One clip in particular went viral. Stallone saying, "Some people confuse cruelty with comedy." Millions of views in under an hour. By the time Jimmy returned from commercial, his phone was buzzing nonstop on the desk. Producers whispered urgently from off-camera, gesturing for him to wrap the segment early. Jimmy tried to recover. He joked about the weather. He introduced the next guest. But the energy was gone. The audience laughed politely, distracted, their minds still stuck on the man who had just walked away without raising his voice, yet somehow said everything. When the show finally ended, Jimmy retreated to his dressing room and slammed the door shut. "This is bad," a senior producer said, pacing. "Really bad." Jimmy ran a hand through his hair. He overreacted. The producer stopped. "Jimmy, you poked his scars. Not his movies. His life." Silence hung heavy. Across town, Stallone sat in the back seat of his car, city lights sliding past the window like memories. His phone buzzed repeatedly, but he didn't look at it. Finally, he answered one call. "Hey," said a familiar voice. You okay? It was an old friend. Someone who knew Stallone before fame, before money, before Rocky. I'm fine, Stallone replied. Just tired of pretending everything is a joke. The next morning, headlines dominated entertainment news. Some defended Jimmy, calling the moment awkward but harmless. Others were furious. How dare he mock a man's hunger? Stallone showed real strength. This is why legends don't owe talk shows anything. Then Stallone did something no one expected. He posted a short statement on his social media. No publicist fluff. No PR polish. Just truth. I've laughed at myself my whole life. But pain isn't comedy when it's someone else's survival. I didn't walk out in anger, I walked out in self-respect. The post shattered records. Celebrities began weighing in. An actor tweeted, "Respect to Stallone. There's a difference between roasting and crossing lines." A comedian wrote, "If your joke needs someone's trauma to land, it wasn't that funny." Even former talk show hosts subtly criticized the moment, reminding audiences that interviews were conversations, not ambushes. Jimmy, meanwhile, went silent. For 2 days, no tweets. No statements. No jokes. Behind closed doors, network executives weren't laughing. Sponsors called. Ratings analysts dissected viewer reactions. The question wasn't whether the moment was viral, it was whether it had damaged trust. On the third day, Jimmy returned to his show. The audience applauded cautiously as he walked out, noticeably subdued. He didn't start with a joke. "I want to address what happened earlier this week," Jimmy said, looking directly into the camera. "Sylvester Stallone is a legend. And during our conversation, I crossed a line." The audience leaned forward. "I thought I was being funny," he continued. But humor doesn't excuse disrespect. Especially when someone's sharing where they came from. A pause. "I reached out privately to apologize. And I'm doing it publicly too." The applause was polite, but restrained. Across town, Stallone watched the clip later that night, sitting quietly in his home gym, hands wrapped from training. He nodded once. That was enough. Weeks later, the dust settled, but the impact remained. Entertainment insiders called it a turning point. Interviews became softer. Hosts grew more careful. Guests felt less like targets and more like people. And Stallone, he returned to work. Training at dawn. Writing late into the night. Doing what he'd always done, moving forward. At a film festival months later, a young actor approached him nervously. "Mr. Stallone," he said, that night on TV, "thank you." "For what?" Stallone asked. "For showing that you don't have to shout to be strong." Stallone smiled, that familiar half-smirk. "Strength," he said, "is knowing when to walk away." The cameras flashed. The crowd applauded. And somewhere in a studio office, a cue card sat unused, its joke never told. Because some stories aren't meant to be laughed at. They're meant to be respected.